Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in. We're talking about the ultimate weapon and how chasing it completely fractured global friendships during the Cold War. Best friends turned into bitter rivals, and totally isolated nations formed some of the most bizarre partnerships in modern history.
So, let's start with a massive question that basically sets the stage for everything we're looking at today. Out of 195 countries on Earth, all competing for military and technological supremacy, why do only 10 possess the ultimate weapon? Why is this club so incredibly exclusive?
While looking at this, you can see that a tiny fraction of the world, just 5%, actually pulled this off. And getting a seat at this table wasn't just about having the smartest scientists in the room. No, it required high-stakes spycraft, secret intelligence operations, and honestly, a whole lot of backstabbing your closest allies. We're going to map this out step by step. First, the Manhattan Project distrust, then superpower escalation and rivalry, Western allies left behind, the Great Communist split, proxy alliances and proliferation, and finally, the modern nuclear web.
All right, Section 1, the Manhattan Project, distrust, the roots of the Cold War.
Now, the absolute key thing to remember here is that the US and the USSR were actually allies during World War II when this first massive betrayal went down. Back in 1941, American and British scientists just stopped publishing their nuclear research. Naturally, the Soviet Union immediately sensed they were being shut out of a massive, game-changing technology. So what did they do? They quietly planted double agents right in the middle of America's super-secret Manhattan Project. The Americans eventually figured this out, of course, and started feeding those spies fake info. So literally, from day one, the nuclear age was built on this foundation of absolute, total distrust between the superpowers. And you can see how fast things escalated on this timeline. The fear of Hitler sparked the US program, leading to the Trinity test and the bombings in Japan in 1945. America really thought they'd hold a monopoly on this power for a long time. But those stolen blueprints we just talked about, they allowed the USSR to shatter that monopoly years earlier than anyone predicted, with their successful RDS-1 test in 1949. And just like that, the Cold War was officially on.
Moving to Section 2, superpower escalation and rivalry, the race for the hydrogen bomb.
So, with the American monopoly completely broken, both superpowers were just desperate for a new edge. It wasn't about just having a bomb anymore, it was about having the biggest bomb. They shifted from basic atomic fission, which is splitting atoms, to fusion. This actually mimics how the sun creates energy, joining atoms together to make the hydrogen bomb. This was a terrifying leap. We are talking about a weapon 450 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, just mind-boggling destruction.
And look at how quickly the gap closed here. Every single move by the US triggered an immediate, paranoid reaction from its rivals. The US tests their first hydrogen bomb in 1952, and boom, just 3 years later, the Soviets match them. The UK follows right behind in 1957. It was this relentless, terrifying cycle of one-upsmanship.
Section 3. Western Allies Left Behind, a tale of two betrayals.
You know, it wasn't just enemies stealing from each other. Allies were actively leaving their best friends totally in the dark, fracturing the very alliances that won the Second World War. Take the UK. The British actually started their nuclear research before the Americans, but because they were short on resources during the war, they handed all their early research over to the US under the Quebec Agreement, which promised they'd share the technology. Well, the war ends, and the US completely breaks the deal. They just refused to share the final results. This was a massive betrayal, and it forced the UK to basically start over from scratch, eventually testing their own bomb in 1952.
We see a really similar story with France. During the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, France, the UK, and Israel moved against Egypt. Both superpowers stepped in to shut it down. The USSR straight up threatened a nuclear strike on France, and the US, supposedly France's ally, put heavy economic pressure on them to back off. France felt completely defenseless and hugely embarrassed. They realized they couldn't rely on anybody else for their defense. So, they secretly mined uranium from their African colonies and successfully tested their own bomb by 1960.
Okay, Section 4, the Great Communist Split, enemies within the same ideology.
Just as the Western allies were turning on each other, the Eastern Bloc was totally cracking under the pressure too. During the Korean War, American forces threatened China with nuclear retaliation. Chairman Mao Zedong looked at that and realized conventional armies just weren't going to cut it. Without nuclear power, China would always be suppressed. At first, they had the Soviet Union's full support to build a bomb. But as the Soviets started softening their stance toward the US, massive ideological clashes erupted. So the Soviets abruptly packed up, withdrew all their scientists, and completely abandoned the Chinese program.
And honestly, the level of spite in this geopolitical breakup is incredible. When China finally succeeded in testing their own bomb in 1964, they named the test 596. Why? Because it stood for June 1959. That is the exact year and month the USSR abandoned them. Talk about holding a grudge, a direct, permanent slap in the face.
Section 5. Proxy alliances and proliferation. Black markets and secret friends.
As the big superpowers locked down their tech, countries on the geopolitical edges realized they had to rely on extreme spycraft and some very strange alliances to survive. Israel's path to the bomb reads literally like a spy thriller. They wanted a deterrent, but U.S. President John F. Kennedy fiercely opposed an Israeli nuclear program. He was worried it would push Arab nations right into the arms of the Soviets. But, following his tragic assassination, the political path essentially cleared. Israel secretly completed its testing around 1967. The world didn't actually get confirmation until 1986, when a technician named Mordechai Vanu leaked photos to the press. And the fallout? The Mossad actually ran a dramatic honey trap operation in Europe to kidnap him and drag him back for trial.
Now, maybe the most bizarre alliance of all was between Israel and South Africa. South Africa was totally isolated globally because of its oppressive apartheid laws, and they were terrified of Soviet influence spreading in neighboring countries. So they formed this desperate secret partnership with Israel. South Africa basically traded their uranium in exchange for Israeli nuclear research. This all came to a head with the 1979 Vela incident, when a U.S. satellite picked up a massive double flash in the ocean, which experts widely believe was a covert joint nuclear test. Amazingly, South Africa later became the very first nation to voluntarily dismantle its arsenal in 1990.
Over in South Asia, you can see the dominoes falling in real time. China's success in 1964 absolutely terrified India, especially since they'd just lost a border war to China in 1962. So India imported reactors from the West, claiming they were just for electricity, but actually used them to create weapons-grade material for their 1974 Smiling Buddha test. Well, that test completely panicked Pakistan. The result? They got locked into a bitter arms race that finally peaked in 1998 when India conducted 5 underground tests, and just weeks later, Pakistan fired back with its own retaliatory tests.
Section 6. The Modern Nuclear Web. The Rogue Networks.
So, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. This is where stolen knowledge moved beyond national alliances and created a literal global black market. To catch up to India, a Pakistani scientist named A.Q. Khan stole centrifuge blueprints from Holland. But Pakistan had a problem. They lacked the delivery systems to hit distant targets. Enter North Korea. They were desperate for nuclear weapons after being rejected by both the Soviets and the Chinese. So they made a deeply covert trade. A.Q. Khan handed over the stolen uranium centrifuge blueprints, and in exchange, North Korea gave Pakistan their advanced no-dong missile designs.
And you know what? That terrifying trade worked. While North Korea's first test in 2006 was pretty small, their second detonation in 2009 was undeniable. It was so powerful it actually registered as a magnitude 5.0 earthquake on the Richter scale, officially cementing North Korea as the 10th nuclear power on the globe.
Which brings us right up to today. Every single country we've talked about acquired the bomb because they were terrified of someone else getting it first. It fractured old alliances and forged crazy new ones along the way. As we look at the immense geopolitical pressure in the world right now, especially in the Middle East, we really have to ask ourselves, in this unbroken chain reaction of distrust, which domino is going to fall next? If Iran becomes the 11th, does Saudi Arabia become the 12th? Who else is waiting in the wings to ensure they aren't left behind? Leaving us to wonder just how long this exclusive club will actually stay at 10. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer.